You're gonna regret this.
The entire cabin had gone silent. Every single passenger was staring at row 27, where a 13-year-old girl stood in the aisle, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. Flight attendants surrounded her and another teenager, their faces serious, professional. Then the intercom crackled to life, and the pilot's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a serious situation that needs to be addressed before this aircraft moves an inch. The girl with the box braids and purple tips, wearing a worn NASA hoodie, stood her ground. She had made a choice. And there was no going back now. But to understand how we got here, we need to rewind 6 hours earlier. Tiana Jules was in her bedroom in Philadelphia, shoving clothes into a backpack with the kind of nervous energy that comes from doing something for the very first time. 13 years old, braces gleaming every time she checked her packing list, her box braids freshly done with those purple tips she'd begged her dad for. That NASA hoodie, the one with the small stain on the sleeve that she refused to get rid of, lay on her bed, ready to be the last thing she packed. It was her favorite. Her armor. This was it. Her first solo flight. Spring break. Atlanta. Her grandmother's house, where the sweet tea was always cold and the hugs always lasted just a little longer than necessary. Tiana had been counting down the days for months, but now that it was actually happening, her stomach felt like it was doing somersaults. Her father appeared in the doorway, watching her with that look, the one that was half pride, half worry. He was a middle school science teacher, the kind of dad who coached her through math homework at the kitchen table and made terrible jokes about the periodic table. A single father who had raised her to be smart, kind, and confident. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You got everything? Charger? Headphones? Snacks for the plane? Tiana nodded, not looking up, still focused on fitting one more pair of socks into her already stuffed bag. Her dad walked over and sat on the edge of her bed, his voice softer now. Tia, look at me for a second. She stopped packing and turned to face him. He smiled, but there was something serious behind his eyes. I know you're nervous. That's okay. That's normal. But I need you to remember something, baby girl. You have every right to take up space in this world. You hear me? Every right. Don't let anyone, and I mean anyone, make you feel small. Tiana felt a lump form in her throat. She nodded, trying to appear braver than she felt. Her dad pulled her into a hug, the kind that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could handle this whole flying alone thing. 2 hours later, Tiana stood inside Philadelphia International Airport, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her phone gripped tightly in her other hand. The airport was massive, overwhelming, loud. Travelers rushed past her in every direction, rolling suitcases clicking against the tile floor, announcements echoing from overhead speakers. She took a deep breath and started walking toward the security checkpoint, trying to look like she knew exactly what she was doing. She texted her dad, made it to the airport. Security line is long, but I'm good. His response came immediately, that's my girl. You got this. Text me when you get to the gate. The security line moved slowly. Tiana watched the other passengers, studying how they placed their belongings in the gray bins, how they walked through the metal detectors. When it was finally her turn, she fumbled a bit with her shoes, her cheeks warming with embarrassment, but she made it through without setting off any alarms. Small victory. After security, she stopped at a small shop and bought a bag of gummy bears and a bottle of water, her comfort snacks. Then she followed the signs to gate B-17, weaving through the crowded terminal. When she finally found her gate, she felt a wave of relief. She'd made it. She sent another text to her dad. At the gate. Boarding in 45 minutes. Tiana found a seat near the windows and pulled out her phone, scrolling through nothing in particular, just trying to calm her nerves. That's when she noticed them. A family sitting across from her near the gate counter. A mother with perfect blonde hair, expensive sunglasses perched on her head, designer handbag at her feet. Next to her, a girl about Tiana's age, maybe 13 or 14, scrolling on the latest iPhone, the kind that had just come out. Her outfit looked like it came straight from a magazine, everything matching, everything pristine. Her luggage, pale pink with gold accents, probably cost more than Tiana's entire wardrobe. The girl, Hadley Pemberton, though Tiana didn't know her name yet, had that look, the one that said she'd never had to worry about much of anything in her life. For just a moment, their eyes met. Tiana offered a small, polite smile, the kind you give to another kid when you're in an awkward public space. Hadley looked at her for a second, then looked away, her expression blank, uninterested. She went right back to her phone. Tiana felt something twist in her chest, something she couldn't quite name. She looked down at her own outfit, her worn NASA hoodie, her sneakers that were starting to show their age. She pushed the feeling away and went back to her phone. The gate agent's voice crackled through the speaker. "Good afternoon, passengers. We'll begin boarding for Flight 1847 to Atlanta in just a few moments. We'll start with our first-class passengers and anyone needing extra assistance." Tiana's heart started racing again. This was really happening. She stood up, adjusted her backpack, and got in line with the other passengers in her boarding group. The line moved forward slowly. Hadley and her mother boarded ahead of her, disappearing down the jet bridge. When Tiana finally stepped onto the plane, the flight attendant at the entrance, a woman named Sandra Kowalski with kind eyes and 20 years of experience in the skies, smiled warmly at her. "Welcome aboard, sweetheart. Do you know where your seat is?" Tiana nodded, glancing down at her boarding pass. 27B. "Perfect. Straight back, you'll find it." Tiana walked down the narrow aisle, passing rows of passengers already settling in, stowing bags in the overhead compartments, buckling seat belts. She counted the rows, 23, 24, 25, 26, and then, finally, 27. Her seat. 27B. The middle seat. And sitting in 27A, right by the window, was Hadley Pemberton. If you're already hooked by Tiana's story and want to see how this unfolds, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss what happens next. And let me ask you this. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to decide whether to speak up or stay silent? Drop your answer in the comments below. Tiana stood there for a second, her throat suddenly dry. This was going to be a long flight. Hadley didn't even look up when Tiana stopped at row 27. She was scrolling through her phone, earbuds dangling around her neck, her body language screaming inconvenience. Tiana cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me, I'm in the middle seat." And sitting in 27A, right by the window, was Hadley Pemberton. If you're already hooked by Tiana's story and want to see how this unfolds, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss what happens next. And let me ask you this. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to decide whether to speak up or stay silent? Drop your answer in the comments below. Tiana stood there for a second, her throat suddenly dry. This was going to be a long flight. Hadley didn't even look up when Tiana stopped at row 27. She was scrolling through her phone, earbuds dangling around her neck, her body language screaming inconvenience. Tiana cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me, I'm in the middle seat." Hadley's eyes flicked up for barely a second, and something shifted in her expression. Annoyance. Clear, unmistakable annoyance. She let out an audible sigh, the kind designed to be heard, and slowly, deliberately, pulled her designer purse closer to her body, as if Tiana might contaminate it just by being near. She shifted her legs to the side with exaggerated effort, making just enough room for Tiana to squeeze past. "Thanks," Tiana mumbled, trying to ignore the tension already building in her chest. She slid into the middle seat, her backpack clutched in her lap, and immediately felt the smallness of the space. Middle seats were nobody's first choice, but this felt even more cramped than it should have. On her left, Hadley had already turned her body toward the window, creating as much distance as possible. On her right, in the aisle seat, sat an older white man in a crisp business suit, Mr. Grayson Whitfield, probably in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He had a newspaper spread across his lap and a leather briefcase tucked under the seat in front of him. He glanced at Tiana briefly, offered a polite nod, then returned to his reading. Tiana shoved her backpack under the seat in front of her and buckled her seatbelt, her fingers fumbling slightly with the metal clasp. She could feel Hadley's presence next to her like a wall, cold and unwelcoming. The silence was thick, uncomfortable. Tiana hated silence like this, the kind that made every small sound feel too loud. She decided to try. Maybe it was nerves, maybe it was her dad's voice in her head telling her to be confident, but she turned slightly toward Hadley and offered a small smile. First time flying alone? Hadley didn't turn her head. Didn't even pause her scrolling. Just one word, flat and dismissive. No. That was it. No follow-up question. No reciprocation. Just a wall of disinterest. Tiana felt her face grow warm. She turned back to face forward, her hands folding in her lap. Okay. Fine. She didn't need to make friends. She just needed to get through this flight. Hadley reached up and pulled out her AirPods, shoving them into her ears with more force than necessary, as if to make absolutely sure Tiana understood the conversation was over before it even started. The message was clear: don't talk to me. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, checking seatbelts, closing overhead bins, going through their safety routines. Tiana watched them, trying to focus on anything other than the discomfort radiating from the seat next to her. The engines began to hum louder as the plane prepared to push back from the gate. Her stomach did a little flip. She gripped the armrests, her knuckles going pale. And then, as the plane started to taxi toward the runway, Hadley shifted in her seat, adjusting her position. Her elbow swung out, hard, and slammed directly into Tiana's ribs. Tiana gasped. The air knocked out of her for a second. It hurt. Actually hurt. Hadley didn't apologize. Didn't even acknowledge it. She just repositioned herself, got comfortable, and stared out the window like nothing had happened. Tiana bit her lip, her hand instinctively moving to her side where the elbow had landed. Was that an accident? It had to be, right? It was cramped. People bumped into each other on planes. But something about the way Hadley didn't even glance over, didn't say, sorry, or, my bad, made Tiana's chest tighten with something that felt a lot like humiliation. She looked over at Mr. Whitfield, wondering if he'd noticed. He was still reading his newspaper, his face carefully neutral, as if he existed in his own separate world, and whatever was happening in the seats next to him was none of his concern. The plane continued taxiing, the flight attendants taking their seats for takeoff. That's when Sandra Kowalski, the kind flight attendant from earlier, walked past their row doing a final check. Hadley's hand shot up, stopping her. Excuse me, Hadley said, her voice sweet, polite, the kind of tone that didn't match the coldness Tiana had already experienced. Are there any other available seats? Maybe one with a little more space. Sandra paused, glancing down the aisle, then back at Hadley with a practiced, apologetic smile. I'm sorry, sweetheart, but we're completely full today. Is there something wrong with your seat? Hadley's eyes darted briefly to Tiana, just for a split second, before returning to Sandra. No, it's fine. Just feels a little cramped. Sandra nodded sympathetically. I understand. Middle seats are tough. But we'll be in the air soon, and the flight's only about 2 hours. You'll be in Atlanta before you know it. She moved on, and Hadley slumped back in her seat, her jaw tight. Tiana stared straight ahead, her heart pounding now. That look. That quick glance. It wasn't about space. It was about her. The plane turned onto the runway, engines roaring as they prepared for takeoff. Tiana's hands gripped the armrests again, but this time it wasn't just nerves about flying. It was something else. Something that made her feel small in a way that had nothing to do with the size of the seat. And then she heard it. Hadley was texting someone, her thumbs moving fast across her screen, and she said it out loud, not quite a whisper but not quite full volume either, just loud enough for anyone nearby to hear if they were paying attention. Stuck next to someone who probably can't even afford to be here. Tiana froze. Every muscle in her body went rigid. Her breath caught in her throat. She heard it. She definitely heard it. The words hung in the air like poison, seeping into her skin. Her eyes stung, heat rushing to her face. She didn't move. Didn't turn her head. She just stared straight ahead at the seat in front of her, her vision starting to blur slightly at the edges. Someone who probably can't even afford to be here. Her worn NASA hoodie suddenly felt like a spotlight. Her old sneakers. Her backpack that wasn't name brand. Everything about her felt exposed, judged, found lacking. She wanted to say something. She wanted to turn and confront Hadley right there, but her voice felt trapped in her chest, her throat too tight to force words through. She glanced at Mr. Whitfield, desperate for some acknowledgement, some sign that he'd heard it too, that she wasn't imagining this. But he just folded his newspaper tighter, his eyes fixed on the page, his face deliberately blank. He wasn't going to say anything. He wasn't going to help. Tiana's hands began to shake where they gripped the armrests. She willed them to stop, but they wouldn't. The plane accelerated down the runway, the force pressing her back into her seat, and she closed her eyes, trying to breathe, trying to remember her dad's words. You have every right to take up space in this world. But right now, in this moment, she felt like she was taking up too much. The plane lifted off the ground, climbing steeply into the sky. Tiana kept her eyes closed, focusing on her breathing, trying to push down the rising tide of emotion threatening to spill over. She would not cry. She would not give Hadley the satisfaction. The seatbelt sign stayed on for the first 20 minutes of the flight. Nobody moved. The tension in row 27 felt like a living thing, coiled and waiting. When the sign finally dinged off, Tiana reached down for her backpack, pulling it onto her lap. She needed a distraction, something to focus on besides the girl next to her and the man who'd chosen to be invisible. She unzipped the front pocket and pulled out her book. Hidden Figures. The story of Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Mary Jackson, the brilliant black women mathematicians who helped NASA succeed in the space race. It was one of her favorites, a book she'd read 3 times already. She opened it to her bookmarked page and tried to lose herself in the words. But she only got through 2 paragraphs before she heard it. A scoff. Short, sharp, dripping with contempt. Tiana's eyes stopped moving across the page. She didn't look up. Of course you're reading that. Hadley's voice. Loud enough now that there was no pretending she was talking to herself. This was directed at Tiana. Fully, intentionally. Tiana's fingers tightened on the book. She slowly turned her head, meeting Hadley's eyes for the first time since they'd sat down. Excuse me. Hadley rolled her eyes, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. I said, of course you're reading that. It's just so predictable. Tiana's heart started pounding harder. Predictable. Hadley leaned back in her seat, crossing her arms, her voice taking on a mocking tone. Do you people always have to make everything about race? The words hit Tiana like a slap. You people. Her breath hitched, shock flooding through her system first, then hurt, raw and sharp, and then something else. Anger. Real, burning anger. That's really inappropriate, Tiana said, her voice shaking but steady enough to get the words out. Hadley laughed, actually laughed, like this was all some kind of joke. She leaned in slightly, her eyes narrowing. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You probably only got good grades because of diversity programs anyway. The world tilted. Tiana felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Her academic achievements, her hard work, every late night studying, every project she'd poured herself into, reduced to nothing. Dismissed. Erased. Because of her skin. You don't know anything about me, Tiana managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper now, emotion threatening to crack it open completely. Mr. Whitfield shifted in his seat, his newspaper rustling. Tiana's eyes darted to him, pleading silently. Say something. Please say something. But he just stared down at his paper, his jaw working slightly, and said nothing. He was uncomfortable. She could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way he wouldn't make eye contact. But uncomfortable wasn't the same as willing to help. Tiana looked back at Hadley, whose smirk had only grown wider. The girl was enjoying this. actually enjoying watching Tiana fall apart. Tiana felt the tears building behind her eyes, hot and insistent. No. No, no, no. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of this girl who had no idea what it was like to walk through the world in her skin, who had probably never been made to feel less than because of something she couldn't control. But the tears didn't care about her resolve. They started forming anyway, blurring her vision. She blinked hard, trying to force them back, her fingernails digging into the cover of her book. Before we continue, if you're feeling what Tiana's feeling right now, if this story is making your blood boil or your heart ache, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that button because this story is about to take a turn you need to see. And I want to know, have you ever witnessed something like this happening to someone else? Did you speak up or stay silent? Tell me in the comments. Hadley turned back toward the window, putting her AirPods back in, satisfied with the damage she'd done. The conversation was over in her mind. She'd said what she wanted to say. But for Tiana, sitting in that middle seat, hands trembling, tears threatening to fall, the conversation was far from over. Something was building inside her, something her father had planted with his words that morning. You have every right to take up space in this world. Don't let anyone make you feel small. She reached up, her hand shaking, and pressed the call button above her seat. The small light blinked on, a soft chime echoing through the cabin. Hadley's head turned sharply, her eyes widening slightly as she pulled out one AirPod. "What are you doing?" she asked, a note of uncertainty creeping into her voice for the first time. Tiana didn't answer. She just stared straight ahead, waiting, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. Everything was about to change. The call button stayed lit, that small light above Tiana's head glowing like a beacon in the dim cabin. Her finger had barely left the button when Hadley turned to her, and this time there was no smirk, no casual cruelty. There was something sharper. Panic, maybe. Or anger that someone had dared to push back. "What are you going to do? Tell on me?" Hadley's voice dripped with mockery, but there was an edge underneath it now. "We're not in elementary school." Tiana didn't respond. She kept her eyes forward, her jaw set, her hands still trembling in her lap, but her resolve hardening with every passing second. Her father's words cycled through her mind like a mantra, over and over. You have every right to take up space in this world. Don't let anyone make you feel small. She had spent the last 30 minutes feeling smaller and smaller, shrinking under the weight of Hadley's words, under Mr. Whitfield's silence, under the assumption that maybe she should just endure it, just get through the flight, just keep her head down. But something had shifted. The tears that had threatened to fall moments ago were still there, hot behind her eyes, but they weren't tears of defeat anymore. They were something else. Determination. Anger. Refusal. Footsteps approached from the front of the cabin. Sandra Kowalski, the flight attendant with the kind eyes, appeared at their row, her expression professional and concerned. She looked at Tiana, then at the lit call button, then back at Tiana. "How can I help you, sweetheart?" Tiana took a breath. Her voice shook, but it came out, clear. Loud enough for the rows around them to hear. "This passenger has been making racist comments toward me, and I need to report it." The cabin didn't just go quiet. It went dead silent. The kind of silence where you could hear the hum of the airplane engines, the faint rush of air through the vents, the collective held breath of everyone within earshot. Heads turned. Passengers 2 rows up, 3 rows back, across the aisle, all eyes suddenly on row 27. Hadley's face transformed in an instant. Shock first, her mouth falling open slightly, her eyes going wide. Then indignation, red and hot, flooded her features. "I did not." Her voice was loud now, defensive, sharp enough to cut. "She's making this up for attention. I didn't say anything racist. This is insane." But Sandra didn't waver. She'd been doing this job for 2 decades. She'd seen every kind of passenger, every kind of conflict, every kind of lie and truth. She knew how to read a situation. And right now, she was reading Tiana's shaking hands, her barely contained emotion, the way she was holding herself together by a thread. Sandra crouched down slightly, bringing herself to eye level with Tiana, her voice calm and steady. "Okay, honey. I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Take your time. Start from the beginning." Tiana swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight, but she pushed through it. She told Sandra everything. The elbow to her ribs. The request to move seats, the way Hadley had looked at her when she said it. The comment about not being able to afford to be there. The scoff about her book. The words, "you people." The accusation about diversity programs. Every single moment, every single cut, she laid it all out. Her voice shook but never broke. She maintained her composure, even as she felt like she was reliving each painful second. Around them, the silence had taken on a different quality. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was tension. Awareness. Other passengers were listening. Really listening. Hadley was shaking her head the entire time, her face growing redder, her breathing coming faster. The moment Tiana finished, Hadley exploded. "This is so unfair. I didn't do anything wrong. She's just being oversensitive. I can't believe this." And then the tears started. Real tears, streaming down Hadley's face, her voice breaking with what sounded like genuine distress. She looked up at Sandra with wide, wounded eyes, the picture of innocence wrongly accused. "I didn't say those things. Maybe she misunderstood me, but I would never. I'm not racist. This is so wrong. I just wanted to have a normal flight and now I'm being attacked for no reason." It was a performance. Tiana could see it for what it was. The way Hadley's tears came on so quickly, so conveniently. The way she positioned herself as the victim, the one being attacked, when moments ago she'd been smirking, confident, cruel. Sandra's face remained neutral, but her eyes moved between the two girls, calculating, processing. Then she turned to Mr. Whitfield, who had gone very still in his seat, his newspaper now completely forgotten in his lap. "Sir, you were sitting right here. Did you witness any of what these young ladies are describing?" Mr. Whitfield looked like he wanted the floor of the airplane to open up and swallow him whole. His face had gone pale, his eyes darting between Sandra, Tiana, and Hadley. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The pause stretched out, excruciating, endless. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke. I did hear some comments that were inappropriate." Hadley's head snapped toward him, betrayal written all over her face. "What? No. You're—" But Sandra was already standing, her hand up to silence Hadley. "Thank you, sir. Please stay in your seat." She pressed the button on her communication device, speaking quietly into it. "This is Sandra in the main cabin. I need Patricia at row 27 immediately. We have a situation." Hadley was spiraling now, her tears coming harder, her voice rising. "I want to talk to my mom. I want my mom. This is ridiculous. I didn't do anything." "Your mother is in first class?" Sandra asked. "Yes. Row 3. Constance Pemberton. She's going to be so mad when she hears about this." Sandra nodded to another flight attendant who had appeared nearby, a younger woman with concerned eyes. "Go get Mrs. Pemberton from first class, please." The cabin had become a theater, every passenger in the surrounding rows glued to what was unfolding. Some were whispering to their seatmates. Others were silent, just watching. Tiana felt their eyes on her, felt the weight of being the center of attention in a way she'd never wanted to be, but she didn't look away from Sandra. She'd started this. She had to see it through. 2 minutes later, a woman came storming down the aisle from first class, and the word, storming, was the only way to describe it. Constance Pemberton was tall, blonde, perfectly put together even at 30,000 feet, wearing clothes that probably cost more than Tiana's dad made in a month. Her face was a mask of fury, her heels clicking against the floor with sharp, angry precision. "What is going on here?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the cabin like a whip. "Why is my daughter crying? What have you done to her?" Sandra remained calm, professional, her hands clasped in front of her. Mrs. Pemberton, your daughter has been accused of making racist comments to a fellow passenger. We're conducting an investigation. Constance's eyes went wide, then narrowed dangerously. She looked at Tiana, really looked at her for the first time, and her lip curled slightly. My daughter would never. Each word was enunciated like a weapon. Do you know who we are? My husband is a partner at Morrison & Associates. This is slander. This is absolutely unacceptable. I want to speak to whoever is in charge of this aircraft immediately. Sandra didn't flinch. Ma'am, we take these allegations very seriously. Multiple witnesses have. Witnesses? Constance laughed, sharp and bitter. What witnesses? Who? And that's when another voice cut through the tension. A woman's voice, strong and clear, from across the aisle. I'm a witness. Everyone turned. A black woman in her 30s, Yolanda Chen, sitting in the aisle seat across from them, had taken off her headphones and was looking directly at Constance. Her face was calm but firm, her eyes steady. I heard what your daughter said. Every single word. The comment about not being able to afford to be here. The comment about you people. The comment about diversity programs. I heard all of it. Constance's face went from red to almost purple. You're lying. You're covering for her. This is. I heard it too. Another voice, this time from 2 rows back. A Latino man, Jeremy Torres, probably in his 40s, was half standing in his seat so he could be seen. I'm sitting right here. I could hear everything. What your daughter said was completely unacceptable. That young lady, he nodded toward Tiana, has every right to report it. The cabin was electric now, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Constance looked around, her expression one of disbelief, like the world had suddenly turned upside down. This is insane. This is absolutely insane. Hadley was still crying, but now she looked scared. Really scared. The confident, cruel girl from earlier had disappeared, replaced by someone who was realizing that actions had consequences. Sandra pressed her communication device again. Patricia, status? A voice crackled back through her earpiece, and then, moments later, another flight attendant appeared from first class. Patricia Okonkwo. The moment she entered the main cabin, the energy shifted again. She had an air of authority that was impossible to ignore, a no-nonsense expression that said she'd dealt with every kind of problem imaginable and had exactly zero patience for nonsense. 20 years in the sky had made her unshakable. She walked straight to row 27, her eyes taking in the scene. Sandra, Tiana, Hadley crying, Constance fuming, Mr. Whitfield looking miserable, and the surrounding passengers all watching. Someone want to fill me in? Patricia's voice was calm but firm. Sandra did, quickly and efficiently, summarizing the allegations, the witnesses, the denials. Patricia listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When Sandra finished, Patricia turned to Tiana. You're the one who made the report? Tiana nodded, her voice small but steady. Yes, ma'am. And you're willing to stand by everything you've said? Yes, ma'am. Patricia nodded, then turned to Hadley. And you're denying it? Hadley, through tears, nodded frantically. I didn't say those things. Not the way she's making it sound. I didn't mean. Did you or did you not make comments about this young lady's race, her ability to afford this flight, and diversity programs? Hadley's mouth opened and closed. She looked at her mother, desperate. Constance jumped in. She's 13 years old. She doesn't understand how her words. Patricia held up a hand. Ma'am, with all due respect, 13 is old enough to understand the impact of racist language. The word hung in the air. Racist. Said plainly, without hedging, without softening. Constance looked like she'd been slapped. Patricia turned to Mr. Whitfield. You heard the comments? He nodded miserably. Yes. She looked at Yolanda Chen. You heard them. Every word. Jeremy Torres. You as well. Yes. Patricia pulled out her own communication device and pressed a button. There was a brief crackle, then she spoke directly into it. Captain Brennan, this is Patricia. I need you to be aware of a situation we have in the main cabin. Credible allegations of racist harassment with multiple witnesses. Requesting your guidance. The radio crackled back. Copy that, Patricia. Stand by. The seconds that followed felt like hours. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Tiana's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. She'd done it. She'd spoken up. She'd reported it. But what happened now? Would they believe her? Would anything actually change? And then, the intercom system clicked on. Captain Michael Brennan's voice, deep and authoritative, filled every inch of the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have a serious situation that needs to be addressed before this aircraft moves an inch. If you're still watching, if you're invested in seeing justice for Tiana, I need you to do something right now. Subscribe to this channel. Hit that button because you need to see how this ends. And let me ask you, do you think the captain made the right call getting involved? Or should the crew have handled it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Constance went rigid. Hadley's crying stopped abruptly, her face going white. Mr. Whitfield closed his eyes. Yolanda Chen and Jeremy Torres exchanged glances, small nods of approval. And Tiana, sitting in her middle seat in her worn NASA hoodie with her box braids and her trembling hands, felt something shift inside her. She had taken up space. And the world had listened. The intercom clicked off, and for a moment, nothing happened. The cabin remained frozen in that announcement, everyone processing what they'd just heard. Then the cockpit door opened. This never happened. Pilots didn't leave the cockpit mid-flight. They stayed up there, flying the plane, invisible authorities whose voices you heard but whose faces you never saw unless you were boarding or deplaning. But Captain Michael Brennan was walking down the aisle now, in full uniform, his expression set in stone, and every single person on that aircraft understood immediately that this was serious. This was unprecedented. This was real. He was probably in his late 40s, with graying hair at his temples, weathered lines around his eyes that spoke of 2 decades spent in the sky. He carried himself with the kind of authority that didn't need to be loud or aggressive. It just was. People moved instinctively out of his way as he made his way toward row 27. When he reached them, he stopped, standing in the aisle directly next to where Tiana sat. He looked at her first, his eyes kind but serious, then at Hadley, whose face had gone completely pale, then at Constance, whose fury had been replaced by something closer to shock. Then he turned to address the entire cabin, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the aircraft. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. My name is Captain Michael Brennan. I've been flying for 22 years. I've flown through storms, mechanical failures, medical emergencies, every kind of situation you can imagine. He paused, letting his words settle. But there's one thing I will never, under any circumstances, tolerate on my aircraft. And that is discrimination of any kind. The cabin was so quiet you could hear the air circulation system humming. Every eye was on him. He turned back to Hadley and Constance, his expression hardening. Based on multiple witness accounts from credible passengers, your behavior has violated our passenger conduct policy and basic human decency. Constance found her voice, though it came out strangled, desperate. This is ridiculous. We have a connecting flight. We paid for these tickets. You can't just. Captain Brennan's hand came up, not aggressive, just firm enough to stop her. Ma'am, you'll be taking a different connecting flight. We are returning to the gate. You and your daughter are being removed from this aircraft. Effective immediately. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Passengers leaned into the aisles to get a better view. Someone a few rows back whispered, "Oh my God." Another person said, "Good." Hadley's face crumpled. The reality of what was happening crashed into her like a wave. These weren't crocodile tears anymore, the kind she'd summoned when she was trying to play victim. These were real, genuine tears of someone who'd just realized they'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Her hands were shaking. Her breath was coming in short, panicked gasps. "I'm sorry," she choked out, looking around wildly. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean, I was just, please don't, we have to get to Atlanta, please." But Constance wasn't apologizing. She was escalating, her voice rising, sharp and cutting. "You have no right to do this. Do you understand who my husband is? We will be filing a lawsuit. I will be speaking to corporate. I will make sure everyone knows about this abuse of power. This is discrimination against us." Captain Brennan's expression didn't change. He'd clearly dealt with people like Constance before, people who thought status and money and threats could bend reality to their will. "You're welcome to file any complaint you'd like, ma'am. My full report, along with witness statements from multiple passengers, will be available for any investigation. This decision is final. We're returning to the gate now." He turned and walked back toward the cockpit, his steps measured and deliberate. The moment he disappeared through that door, Patricia was on her radio, speaking quickly and efficiently to ground operations. The plane, which had been cruising smoothly at altitude, began to turn. You could feel it, the subtle shift in direction, the slight dip as they started their descent back toward Philadelphia. They were really doing this. They were going back. Hadley was full-on sobbing now, her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. For a moment, just a brief moment, Tiana felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction exactly. Not revenge. Something more complicated. Pity, maybe. Or just the strange, uncomfortable feeling of watching someone fall apart, even someone who'd hurt you. But then she remembered the words. "You people can't even afford to be here. Diversity programs." And the pity hardened into something else. Justice. This wasn't about revenge. This was about accountability. Constance was on her phone now, typing furiously, probably texting her husband, probably already crafting whatever legal threat or complaint she thought would undo this. But her hands were shaking too. Her perfect facade was cracking. The plane descended. 5 minutes. 10. The captain's voice came back over the intercom, professional and calm, announcing to the rest of the passengers that they'd be returning to the gate briefly to address a passenger conduct issue and that they appreciated everyone's patience. No drama. No specifics. Just facts. When the wheels touched down on the runway, Tiana felt her whole body tense. This was happening. This was really happening. The plane taxied back to the gate, the familiar ding of the seatbelt sign turning off echoing through the cabin. But no one moved. Everyone stayed in their seats, watching, waiting. The door opened. Ground security boarded, 2 officers in uniform, their presence official and undeniable. Patricia spoke with them briefly, pointing toward row 27. They nodded and walked down the aisle. "Mrs. Pemberton, Miss Pemberton, we need you to gather your belongings and come with us." Constance stood, her movements stiff and jerky, fury radiating from every inch of her body. She yanked her designer bag from the overhead compartment with more force than necessary. Hadley moved like she was in a daze, slowly pulling her pink luggage down, her face blotchy and red from crying. They started walking toward the front of the plane, security officers flanking them. And as they passed row 27, Constance's eyes locked onto Tiana. The glare she gave was pure venom, hatred and blame and rage all rolled into one look. Like this was Tiana's fault. Like Tiana had done something wrong by refusing to stay quiet. Tiana met her eyes. Didn't look away. Didn't shrink. Just looked right back. Hadley, walking behind her mother, kept her head down. She didn't look at Tiana. Didn't look at anyone. Just stared at the floor as she shuffled forward, one foot in front of the other, her world collapsing around her. And then, from somewhere in the back of the plane, someone started clapping. Then someone else joined in. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire cabin was applauding, the sound building and building, echoing off the walls of the aircraft. It wasn't mean-spirited. It wasn't mocking. It was support. Solidarity. Approval. Constance's jaw tightened, her face going red. She walked faster, practically dragging Hadley toward the exit. The security officers escorted them off the plane, and the moment they disappeared from view, the door closed behind them. The applause continued for a few more seconds, then slowly died down. The cabin settled into a different kind of silence now, one tinged with relief and something almost like pride. Tiana sat in her seat, her hands still gripping the armrests, her body still trembling slightly from the adrenaline coursing through her system. She felt like she'd just run a marathon. Exhausted. Shaky. But also something else. Something she hadn't expected. Strong. Patricia walked back down the aisle, stopping at row 27. She crouched down next to Tiana's seat, her expression soft now, the stern authority replaced with genuine warmth. You did the right thing, sweetheart. Speaking up takes courage, especially at your age. I'm proud of you. Tiana's eyes filled with tears again, but these were different. These weren't tears of hurt or anger or fear. These were tears of release, of being seen, of being believed. Thank you, she whispered, her voice cracking. Patricia smiled. We have some open seats up front now. Would you like to move somewhere with a little more space? Maybe a window seat. Tiana nodded, not trusting herself to speak without fully breaking down. Patricia helped her gather her things, and as Tiana stood up, Yolanda Chen, the woman who'd been the first witness to speak up, reached across the aisle and gently touched Tiana's arm. Hey, sweetie. Yolanda's voice was warm, maternal. I'm proud of you. Don't ever let anyone treat you that way. You hear me? You have just as much right to be here as anyone else on this plane. More, actually, because you've got integrity. Tiana managed a small smile, her throat too tight to respond properly. She nodded, hoping Yolanda could see the gratitude in her eyes. Then Mr. Whitfield spoke up. He'd been silent this whole time, shrinking into his seat, and now his voice came out quiet, ashamed. I should have spoken up sooner. I heard everything she said to you, and I should have said something right away. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Tiana looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who'd sat there, uncomfortable but silent, while she'd been torn apart. This man who'd only found his voice when directly asked by the flight attendant. Who'd almost let her face this alone. She could have said, "It's okay." That would have been the easy thing, the polite thing. But her father's words were still echoing in her mind. Don't let anyone make you feel small. And staying silent when you should speak up, that made people feel small too. Yeah, Tiana said, her voice steady now, clear. You should have. Mr. Whitfield's face crumpled slightly, but he nodded, accepting the weight of that truth. You're right. I should have. I will next time. Tiana hoped there wouldn't be a next time. But if there was, maybe he'd remember this moment. Maybe he'd be braver. Patricia led Tiana toward the front of the cabin, to a window seat in row 8 with plenty of space and no one in the middle or aisle seat. As she settled in, Sandra appeared with a tray. We've got some extra snacks for you, honey. Cookies, pretzels, juice, whatever you want. And this, Sandra pulled out a small plastic pin, golden wings with a blue center, is for junior pilots. You've earned it today. Tiana took the pin, her fingers closing around it. It was a small thing, probably given to kids all the time, but right now it felt significant. Important. She pinned it to her NASA hoodie, right over her heart. Before the plane started moving again, before they finally began their journey to Atlanta for real this time, the cockpit door opened one more time. Captain Brennan emerged, and this time he walked straight to row 8. He knelt down next to Tiana's new seat, bringing himself to her eye level. You handled that with more grace than most adults would have, he said, his voice quiet enough that only she could hear. What you did today took real courage. Keep that strength. The world needs more people like you. Tiana felt fresh tears spring to her eyes, but she blinked them back, managing a wobbly smile. "Thank you, Captain." He nodded, standing up, and made his way back to the cockpit. The door closed. The engines started their familiar whine. The plane began to push back from the gate, for the second time that day, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. Tiana looked out her window as they taxied toward the runway. The ground crew, the airport buildings, everything looked the same as it had an hour ago. But she felt different. Changed. Like she'd crossed some invisible threshold and couldn't go back to who she'd been before. If this story has moved you, if you're feeling what Tiana's feeling right now, then I need you to subscribe. Hit that button because stories like this matter and you won't want to miss what comes next on this channel. And let me ask you something real. Mr. Whitfield waited until he was asked to speak up. Was his testimony still valuable? Or does staying silent when you witness injustice make you part of the problem? I want to hear your honest thoughts in the comments. The plane lifted off the ground, climbing into the sky, and Tiana pressed her forehead against the window, watching Philadelphia grow smaller and smaller beneath her. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to her dad. "Dad. Something happened on the flight. I'm okay. Actually, I'm more than okay. I'll tell you everything when I land. But I just wanted you to know, I remembered what you said. I didn't let anyone make me feel small. I love you." She hit send and watched the message deliver, then looked back out the window at the clouds rushing past. Somewhere in the airport below, Hadley and Constance Pemberton were probably arguing with customer service agents, demanding refunds, threatening lawsuits, clinging to their anger and their denial. But up here, at 30,000 feet, Tiana Jules was flying toward Atlanta with a junior pilot pin on her hoodie and the knowledge that her voice mattered. That she mattered. And no one could take that away from her. The plane climbed steadily, pushing through the lower atmosphere toward cruising altitude. Tiana watched through her window as Philadelphia disappeared beneath a blanket of white clouds, the ground becoming invisible, replaced by an endless expanse of blue sky above and cotton-like clouds below. It was beautiful. Peaceful. So different from the chaos of the past hour. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Her dad's response. "That's my girl. I love you so much." 6 words. Simple. But they carried everything. Pride. Love. Support. Understanding. Tiana read them 3 times, her chest tight with emotion, then she typed back a heart emoji and locked her phone, pressing it against her chest for a moment. The cabin had settled into the familiar rhythm of flight. The drink cart was making its way down the aisle. Passengers were pulling out laptops, opening books, putting on headphones. Life moving forward, as it always did. But for Tiana, time felt suspended. She couldn't quite focus on anything except the thoughts swirling in her head. She'd been so scared. That's what kept coming back to her. The moment Hadley had first made that comment, the moment Tiana had heard those words, "Someone who probably can't even afford to be here," she'd felt her entire body go cold. Her hands had shaken. Her throat had closed up. She'd wanted to disappear, to make herself smaller, to just endure it and get through the flight without making waves. That would have been easier. Staying quiet was always easier. She could have convinced herself that maybe she'd misheard. Maybe Hadley didn't mean it the way it sounded. Maybe if she just ignored it, it would stop. Those were the thoughts that had run through her mind in those first few minutes, the justifications and the doubts and the fear. But then Hadley had kept going. And those words, "you people," the sneer about her book, the accusation about diversity programs, they'd stripped away any possibility of pretending this was anything other than what it was. Cruelty. Racism. Injustice. And Tiana had made a choice. She'd pressed that call button. Her hand shaking, her heart racing, everything in her wanting to shrink back down, but she'd done it anyway. She'd used her voice, even though it cracked and trembled. She'd told the truth, even though she knew it would be uncomfortable and difficult and scary. And people had listened. Not everyone right away. Mr. Whitfield had needed to be asked directly. Had sat there in his discomfort, pretending not to notice until he couldn't anymore. That hurt, knowing he'd almost let her face it alone. But eventually, he'd spoken up. And Yolanda Chen hadn't hesitated at all, had jumped in without being asked, had stood up for a 13-year-old girl she'd never met because it was the right thing to do. Jeremy Torres too. And Sandra, and Patricia, and Captain Brennan. A whole plane full of people, and enough of them had chosen to stand with her. That mattered. It mattered more than she could fully process right now. Tiana looked down at the junior pilot wings pinned to her NASA hoodie. Such a small thing. Probably given to kids on every flight. But she'd keep this one forever. She already knew that. This pin would go in her memory box, the one she kept under her bed with ticket stubs and photos and the acceptance letter to the science magnet program she'd worked so hard to get into. This pin was proof. Proof that she'd been brave. Proof that she'd stood up for herself. Proof that her voice mattered. She knew, sitting there at 35,000 feet, that this wouldn't be the last time she faced something like this. That was the reality of moving through the world as a young black girl. There would be other Hadleys. Other microaggressions and not-so-micro ones. Other moments where she'd have to decide whether to speak up or stay quiet, whether to make waves or keep her head down. But now she knew she could handle it. Not that it would ever be easy. Not that it wouldn't still hurt, still make her hands shake and her throat tight. But she'd proven to herself today that she had the strength to do hard things. To stand up even when she was terrified. To take up space even when someone tried to make her feel small. Her father's words had given her permission. The flight crew had given her support. The witnesses had given her validation. But the courage that had come from inside her. Tiana leaned her head against the window, watching the clouds drift past, and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. The fear, the anger, the hurt, the relief, the pride. All of it, washing through her in waves. She didn't try to stop the tears that came this time. She just let them fall silently, her face turned toward the window where no one could see. By the time the captain's voice came over the intercom announcing their descent into Atlanta, Tiana had cried herself empty and then somehow filled back up with something else. Something that felt like peace, or maybe just acceptance. What had happened had happened. She couldn't change it. But she'd handled it the best way she knew how. And that was enough. The plane descended through the clouds, breaking through into clearer air, and suddenly Atlanta was spread out below them. The city sprawling in all directions, highways like veins carrying tiny cars, buildings catching the afternoon sun. Almost there. Almost to her grandmother's house, to safety, to home. The landing was smooth. The wheels touched down with barely a bump, the engines reversing, the plane slowing as it taxied toward the gate. Tiana gathered her backpack, made sure she had her phone, checked that her junior pilot wings were still pinned securely to her hoodie. When the seatbelt sign dinged off, she stood with the other passengers, joining the familiar shuffle toward the exit. Sandra was at the door, saying goodbye to everyone as they left. When Tiana reached her, Sandra pulled her into a quick hug. "You take care of yourself, sweetheart. Remember how strong you are." Tiana nodded, her throat too tight to speak, and stepped off the plane into the jet bridge. The walk through the airport felt surreal. Everything looked normal. People rushing to their gates, families reuniting, the smell of coffee and fast food, announcements echoing overhead. But Tiana felt like she was moving through it all in slow motion, like she was seeing everything through new eyes. She followed the signs toward baggage claim and arrivals, her pace quickening as she got closer. And then she saw her. Her grandmother, standing near the bottom of the escalator, exactly where she'd said she'd be. She was 72 years old but carried herself like someone much younger, her silver hair cut short, her face breaking into a wide smile the moment she spotted Tiana. She was wearing her favorite purple cardigan, the one Tiana associated with every visit, every hug, every time she'd needed comfort. Tiana's pace went from a walk to a jog to almost a run. She crashed into her grandmother's arms, and suddenly she was 13 years old and 5 years old and every age in between, just a kid who'd had a really hard day and needed her grandmother. Her grandmother held her tight, one hand on the back of her head, the other wrapped around her shoulders, rocking slightly the way she always did. She smelled like cocoa butter and vanilla, familiar and safe. "Hey there, baby girl," her grandmother said softly, not letting go yet. "Your daddy told me what happened." Tiana pulled back just enough to look up at her grandmother's face. There were tears in the older woman's eyes, but she was smiling, proud and fierce. "You know what?" Her grandmother cupped Tiana's face in both hands, looking directly into her eyes. "You're going to be just fine in this world. You hear me? Just fine." Tiana nodded, a genuine smile breaking across her face for the first time in hours. Not a polite smile, not a nervous smile, but a real one. Full of relief and gratitude and the simple joy of being with someone who loved her unconditionally. "Yeah," Tiana said, her voice steady. "I think I am." Her grandmother draped an arm around her shoulders, and together they started walking toward the exit, toward the parking garage, toward the car that would take them to the house where sweet tea waited and comfortable beds and the kind of rest that came from being truly safe. As they walked, Tiana's head held high, her NASA hoodie with its new junior pilot wings visible to anyone who looked. She felt something settle inside her. A knowing. A certainty. She'd faced something hard today. Something that had tested her in ways she'd never been tested before. And she'd passed that test. Not perfectly, maybe. But honestly. Bravely. With integrity. And if she could do it once, she could do it again. The automatic doors slid open, letting in the warm Atlanta air, the late afternoon sun painting everything gold. Tiana and her grandmother stepped out into it together, and for just a moment, Tiana paused, tilting her face up toward that sun, feeling its warmth on her skin. She thought about Hadley, somewhere back in Philadelphia, facing consequences for the first time maybe in her life. She thought about Mr. Whitfield, who'd learned that silence had a cost. She thought about Yolanda Chen and Jeremy Torres, who'd proven that speaking up could change everything. She thought about Captain Brennan and Patricia and Sandra, who'd shown her that some adults really do stand up for what's right. And she thought about herself. Tiana Jules. 13 years old. Box braids with purple tips. Braces. A worn NASA hoodie. A girl who'd found her voice when it mattered most. Every voice matters. Every single one. No matter how young, no matter how scared, no matter how small you might feel in the moment. Every person deserves dignity. Every person deserves respect. And when that dignity is threatened, when that respect is denied, speaking up isn't just an option. It's a responsibility. Stand up. Speak out. Even when your hands are shaking. Even when your voice cracks. Even when you're not sure anyone will listen. Because they might. And that might make all the difference. Tiana squeezed her grandmother's hand and smiled. She was going to be just fine. Before you go, I need you to do 2 things for me. First, subscribe to this channel. Stories like Tiana's need to be told, and if you believe that too, then hit that subscribe button right now. Second, I want to hear from you. What's one situation where you wish you'd spoken up but didn't? Or tell me about a time when you did find your voice and what happened. Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Tiana's story doesn't end here. It begins here. And maybe, if you've been listening, your story does too. Every voice matters. Every person deserves dignity. Stand up. Speak out.